Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Rhombus Tix, and this is a series called Swamp Castle with its story titled The Perfect Pie. What did you find? Bimmer MG asked. We have over 400 different samples to try. We're running 13 of them now. We'll have 100 done by the end of the day, 17 said. It floated from side to side with whimsical arbitrariness. Bimmer had been hired to find the perfect pie. There was nothing unusual about that per se. The universe was full of odd things. However, his client wanted him to hunt through all of the billions of potential worlds of what might have been, spending the gross domestic product of several small countries to do so. For a pie. Good start. Not bad for a first day's work. Not bad if I do say so myself. What's the closest we've come to on the algorithm thus far? Bimmer asked as he began to pace. The robot replied, 42%. Bimmer cursed and dismissed it. Transactional Realities, Inc. was one of the larger what-if conglomerates. It had over 32% of the market share from 5 of the 9 prime worlds. Someone could order anything from their own personal timeline to simply having their own personal version of the Mona Lisa. He didn't know where the client had obtained the recipe for the pie, but he had some suspicions. No doubt the client had fond memories of eating pie as a little girl in the country that her grandmother used to make. That would have made the request slightly odd, but hardly unique. It was the technical specificity of the request that puzzled him. Sunlit banners fluttered on the wind outside of Bimmer's front window. There were no clouds in the sky, but the weatherman said that it was going to rain cats and dogs later that evening. Idly, he wondered how expensive it would be to create world gates to do just that, but only as a purely academic exercise. Just because any living thing on a non-prime world had no legal status didn't mean it was politically expedient. Besides, Bimmer liked cats. The small light on Bimmer's desk flickered gray. That meant a government official wanted his attention, and there was only one that ever really bothered to look over Bimmer's shoulder. One was enough. Bimmer reluctantly acknowledged the summons, and in a flash of virtual presence of Hyman Smarkim appeared into the midst of his office. Hyman was a small man who was built like a brick. He had a gaunt, stretched face, but the rest of him was absolutely bulging with muscles. Bimmer had never met Hyman face to face, so he wasn't sure if Hyman was altering his appearance, but Bimmer doubted it. Not Hyman's style. Hyman, Bimmer said with the minimal politeness he could muster. Good morning, Mr. MG. How are you today? Just fine, thanks. What brings you here? It has come to my attention that you are looking for a pie. Is that correct? Word traveled fast. Bimmer said, That's confidential client information. Do you have a warrant? Hyman huffed. People didn't confront him like that, particularly finders. Hyman could easily have Bimmer's license revoked if he was found to be in violation of the arcane rules set forth by the consortium. More importantly, Bimmer had never dared to defy him before. Hyman was at his worst when he was petty. Hyman said, No, I do not. But I can get one. Really? Am I under suspicion for something? Not per se. Hyman smiled and crossed his arms. Then what's the problem? I would think that the use of company resources for such a useless thing would almost be making mockery of our society. What? Oh, yes. You see, it is illegal to demean the consortium, Hyman chuckled. Isn't there something in the Bill of Perfection about free speech? That's speech. Engaging in activities that demean humanity itself, however, is not acceptable. And finding a pie is demeaning to humanity? It is if you are making a mockery of the greatest invention in the history of mankind. Mockery? How is it mockery? Because it is frivolous, Hyman supplied. Not to my client. You get your day in court, Hyman said. Why don't you ask my client instead of hounding me? She has been summoned as well. Hyman waved as he walked away, fading from view. Great. It was time to call a lawyer. Athens' Bartlemy was an undisputed expert on the very complicated subject. Even treaties between not prime worlds usually required an additional doctorate to understand, which was fortunate because Athens had 17 of them. Bemer was glad he had Athens on his side. You have a very good case, Athens said. Well, I'm relieved. What do we do? Honestly? While we have a very good case, I think it would be far cheaper to simply give him what he wants. If I drop clients every time Hyman comes by looking to throw his weight around, then no one would trust me. That's unacceptable, Bemer said. Athens shook his head. No, that's not what I meant. And what was that? Give him what he really wants, not what he says he wants. And what would that be? Bemer asked. Political science requires about twice as many doctorates as law these days, but the gist of it is that he's a realismist, and your client is a panhumanist. A what with who where? Realismists and panhumanists are the same on the surface, but they come at their goal from totally different reasons. Let's just keep it simple and say that Hyman wants to humiliate your client, and also suspects her of being up to something, Athens said. Pie? They're trying to humiliate each other over pie? Is that what she wants? Athens said. Yes, that's it, yes. Why doesn't she just go to a bakery? Athens said, looking at his fingernails. It's a very special pie, Bemer said. Apparently. 17 did not think of itself as just a number. It was quasi-sentient, but the sentience was not so directed and diluted that it happily lived to perform its tasks that were set for it by its masters. And right now, it was looking for a very particular pie. It had tried over 47 different worlds so far, and not even discovered anything resembling a match. The locals had been on a picnic, but noticed the floating silver disc. They began shouting and pointing. Quite frankly, the robot was surprised they didn't fall down and worship it. They were so primitive. But they did have a rather interesting pie. It dove down and read the white and red checkerboard cloth on the ground. The pie was just the right shape, size, and chemical composition. It was a very close match. Well, the robot knew that 70% wouldn't be satisfying to its master, but it was much better than anything found so far. With surgical precision, it burrowed into the space between the worlds like a parasite. Moving into the temporal bloodstream, it sent out a dozen mini-probes, looking at the nearest echoes of the world it had just been to, seeking, searching, trying to find an answer. There was a golden ping from one of its smaller brethren. Somewhere nearby was the largest continuity match detected so far. It would possibly even be the perfect match. Its fields quivered with anticipation at being the one to bring home the prize. Its mother would be so proud of it. What can you tell me about your client? Athens asked. Technically nothing. I'm your lawyer. Any confidentiality clauses do not apply to me. I should know. I wrote your contracts. No, I really can't tell you much. Start with her name, Athens said. I don't know. Athens was incredulous. You took a client without knowing her name? I do that kind of thing all the time. You yourself told me it was illegal, Bemer said. I told you it was technically legal. I also told you that you had the full force of the law protecting your confidentiality, as if you were legal or medical counsel. That doesn't mean I think it's a good idea. Just because something is technically legal doesn't mean it has as much strength of force in court. Well, I guess we'll find out. Athens rolled his eyes. Yes, I guess we will. 17 scanned the pie 5 more times from different angles, just to be sure. It was a 100% match. Such a thing was not supposed to be possible. More importantly, why was the pie on a ledge of a road in the middle of nowhere? Granted, the lack of humans anywhere in a 10-mile radius didn't upset it so much since humans were screaming nearby. Rescue was hardwired into its circuits, and the fake humans were far too close to the real thing for its comfort. Protocol demanded that it summon a collector immediately, but the pie was preciously close to the ledge. The mountain vista around the area would certainly be considered scenic by human standards, but it presented too much of an unpredictable risk to the pie. In the end, 17 decided to seize the initiative and take the pie itself. It left a small gold coin on the windowsill. Its master was, of course, by no means required to do so legally, but it was considered polite in some human circles. "I'd like to call my first witness," Athens said, his glasses with his nose, lifting them as an excuse to scratch it.
"Wouldn't this be more like your fourth or fifth witness?"
the judge said politely. "I mean my first real witness. You may think of the others as pre-witnesses." The judge sneered, her golden locks billowing with the strength of her gavel blow. "I don't care. Cut this flowery crap and bring in the next witness." Bemmer was one of those people who thought that electing judges was a very bad idea, and Judge Icon was exactly Exhibit A. "I would like to call Emma Throckett to the stand." Throckett could tell Athens was talking as if there was an audience. There wasn't one. Emma Throckett was the queen of the local upper crust. She was fabulously rich, but Bemmer was still shocked to find out that she had been his client. Bemmer made a point to keep track of potential clients, and he'd never heard of her showing the slightest public interest in portals before. "Please raise your right hand," Judge Icon said. She did so. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" she asked. "To the extent that I am able, yes." The judge nodded to Emma Throckett and then looked expectantly at Hyman. Hyman said, "You're a pan-humanist, are you not?" She smiled proudly. "Yes, I am." "In fact, you are one of the paramount defenders in the world of pan-humanist philosophy, are you not?" "Yes." "Do you deny that pan-humanism is in direct violation of the Treaty of Nine, which explicitly states that only the 9 prime worlds are real, and that all the others are not?" "It's the preamble. The Bill of Perfection guarantees freedom of thought and belief," Emma said. Yes. Of course, you're very patriotic. But don't you agree that that it is largely held by the courts, that while saying what you believe is legal, acting on those beliefs when they have a direct contradiction to the welfare of the state is not?" Hyman asked. Emma looked flustered a moment. "Are you accusing me of treason? I assure you I've broken no law." "Not directly. Certainly no law that is on the books yet. However, Mr. Beamer Amji most certainly has, and you know him when Lee set him up for it." "I did no such thing." Emma looked around the courtroom for support. Beamer smiled at her. "Do you deny employing Mr. Amji to purchase the, quote, perfect, end quote, pie?" "I do not, but do you deny that the parameters you supplied Mr. Bemer were in fact extraordinarily detailed, biological, chemical, physical, and aesthetic matches for the pie of the year, according to Ambulant Housewives Monthly?" Hyman rolled back on his feet, positively gloating. "No, I do not," she said, slightly more serious in tone. She had a look in her eye that Bemer did not like at all, and if she had been doing something naughty and been caught when she hadn't thought she would be, and was extremely proud of her own cleverness. He had seen that look in his 7-year-old daughter. Bemer stopped smiling at her. "Explain for those not well versed in politics, if you will, Mrs. Throckett," Hyman said as he paced the room in front of the judge, hands behind him in dignified poised perfection. "The primary differences between pan-humanism and realismism. Realism is a literary device, yes. It's a play on words, but we've heard it before. What is the difference between pan-humanism and realismism?" She sighed. "Pan-humanism is the belief that all worlds are equally real. We therefore work to get the government to treat them as such. Since this is a political unreality, we work to limit the damage to humanity in non-real worlds as much as possible. Realismists believe that only the 9 prime worlds are real, They call the gateways the sure sign of our reality and work to prevent other worlds from getting the technology. However, they also work to prevent too heavy a hand in worlds with other humans in it, not because they believe those humans are real directly, but their mere image is sacred. It's a subtle but vital difference, which is why most people can't tell us apart, despite the fact that it is a day and night difference about why we do what we do. Of course, Hyman said. And now we come to the real question. Why the pie, Miss Throckett? Emma remained silent. The judge did not look happy at all. Bemmer looked at Emma nervously, and then he looked at Athens. Then Bemmer looked at Emma, who sat there quite content not to say anything whatsoever. If you refuse to testify, Judge Icahn said, you will be held in contempt. Emma still refused to say anything. The judge looked at the bailiff and ordered her taken away. While Hyman watched, smiling, things were definitely not looking good for the defense. Hyman said, I'd like to call my next witness. Bemmer stood in shock. A robot wheeled into the room. That was his robot. That's a robot. It can't testify in court. Athens looked at the judge. This wasn't in the evidence list or witness list. What's going on here? Hyman smiled and spread his hands warmly to the judge. I'm terribly sorry for any misgivings, Your Honor. However, I believe these are extraordinary circumstances. I'm listening, Judge Icahn said. This robot has just been upgraded to full sentience. It can testify as an independent entity, Hyman said. What? Bemmer stood up. Can he do that? Judge Icahn said. Not in any court that I've heard of. Artificially intelligent life forms are recognized as sentience by treaty, Hyman said. The judge nodded. Certainly, but this kind of thing is totally unprecedented. You can't just take a man's property and make it a citizen. Actually, Your Honor, there is. Hannity versus Blandon shows that a biological construct that achieves sentience on its own can still have the rights of a sentient. Ancorp versus Model 2415K shows that there is no legal difference between a mechanical sentient being and a biological one. Hyman smiled smugly. Judge Icahn sneered. Surely you don't expect me to believe that this machine upgraded itself? And you can't just declare something sentient without a review. Yes, Your Honor. We had Judge Dockett's court approve an evaluator this morning. 17 passed with flying colors. Fine, the judge said. Hyman looked shocked. What? You seem surprised, Judge Icahn said, smiling with condescending amusement. Well, let me make it perfectly clear. I consider this utter nonsense, but there are enough grounds that one of the two of you is going to appeal no matter what I do. So it is only a matter of morbid curiosity that I don't toss you out of my courtroom in contempt. Hyman sighed. I think that statement alone would be grounds for appeal, but in the interest of expedience, I will question my witness. He turned to the robot, which would not fit in the witness chair, and said, Are you Droid 17? Droid 17 floated a little higher and said, Yes, I am Droid 17. What were you commissioned to do? Find a pie. What kind of pie? A perfect pie. A perfect pie according to the specifications outlined by Mr. Bemmer's client. What can you tell us about the parameters of the pie? It's complicated. Go ahead and try and explain it to us, Hyman said. You won't understand, he explained patiently. Try me? No. Or try me? No. No. Hyman put his hands in front of his face, trying to control his rage. Slowly, deliberately, he moved them down to his sides, and with deliberate, mechanized calm, he said, Can you summarize the most important parameters of the technical specifications as if you were making a report on the mission's progress? Certainly. There was an awkward pause for several moments until Hyman said, Would you please do so? The pie we were told to look for had several qualities that matched this reality. So you were told to find a pie that matched our reality on a quantum level outside our reality. That is correct. That is all, Hyman said, as if he looked like he had achieved some masterpiece. The judge looked at Athens expectantly. Athens stood and said, "Your Honor, if it pleases the court, I'd like to request a recess. This witness was just sprung on us, and we need time to prepare for our questions." "Granted," the judge said without hesitation. "Court will reconvene in 24 hours. Make the best use of your time, counsel." The next day, Bemer and Athens were smiling. Hyman was not. The judge motioned to Athens to talk to the witness. Nodding, Athens obliged and walked up to 17. He took a deep breath and said, "17, what do you think Bemer was breaking any laws by sending you out to find the pie?" "No, I do not," it replied. Athens turned and looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I understand that this is a special emergency, a preliminary hearing, so the regular rules of evidence do not apply. And I understand that you are already setting things up for an appeal before the trial even starts. We certainly agree with you, however, before it even comes to that, Your Honor. Thus far, the honorable prosecutor has yet to actually prove anything, save that my client was engaged in lawful business practices. His client may have committed contempt by refusing to testify. But do we need to guess what the prosecutor intends to charge my client with? We know the law, but we all have yet to hear a specific violation of the law." The judge looked at Hyman. "They do have a point, Mr. Smarkham. Do you have any actual point of what is going on here?" Hyman stood up straight and said, "The very act of using the height of human achievement, the gate, to something so paltry as a pie, is a disgrace and a mockery. It is my belief that this is a deliberate and calculated attempt on the part of Mrs. Throckett to mock the gate in an unacceptable manner." The judge looked at him and then looked at Bemer. "That's it? You mean you really are basing your whole case on a pie?" she said. "Yes, that is the entirety of my case, but I mean to call several case dismissed," the judge said without hesitation. But nothing. Get out of my court." Hyman began packing up his papers in a fit of fury. "Don't think this is the end of it. I'm going to appeal." "I'm sure you will," Judge Icahn said, "and I greatly look forward with amusement to examining the appeals court reaction. Something tells me you won't get far. Get out. Now." Hyman left in a huff, and the judge immediately dismissed the charges against Bemer. Bemer scratched his head trying to figure out exactly what all of that had been about when his client came out of the courthouse. He smiled. "They've released you?" "Oh, yes. Thank you, Mr. Amge. You were most excellent." She hugged him and pecked him on the cheek. Bemer rubbed his cheek thoughtfully, trying to make sense of it all. "What did I do?" "Why, everything. I couldn't have asked for a better performance." "I wasn't performing. What was all this about? Was there actually some elaborate scheme to mock him?" "In a manner of speaking," she said cryptically. "So he was right." "Not really. I admit I rather suspected the anonymous tips I was sending his way would get a reaction, just as not this strong a reaction." Bemer rubbed his jaw and then rubbed his forehead. Quite frankly, this was all giving him a headache. "So, just what exactly was the pie for? Call me simple, but I don't understand." "Perhaps I will show you rather than explain. They do say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, after all," Emma said demurely. "By all means." Emma snapped her fingers, and Droid 17 came out of the courthouse with the pie. Emma moved towards the opposite side of the courthouse, where Hyman was holding his obligatory press conference. Emma whistled, causing Droid 17 to throw the pie, with perfect precision, precisely into the back of Hyman's head. The contents of the pie slowly dripped down his $1,000 suit and onto the grass below. Hyman sputtered with rage, wiping the innards of the pie off himself with his now blue hands. His gray suit looked like it was bleeding veins of blue that streamed down in liquid tears to his finely polished shoes. Before he could regain his composure, Emma strolled radiantly across the green and took her place beside him, beaming before the security cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, as you are no doubt aware, I am sympathetic to the cause known as panhumanism. I'll keep this brief. The pie that hit Mr. Smarkham in the head is, down to almost every identical detail, precisely identical to any pie that would be made in our own world. What you need to know is that the humiliation and anger it caused him are just as real as if the pie were made by humans here. But this is Mr. Smarkham's press conference. I shan't ruin it more for him. Good day." And with that, she glided through the reporters that stormed her with a dozen questions which she steadfastly refused to answer. Bemmer looked at Droid 17, still trying to take it in. "You're working for her now? I need to do something now that I'm sentient. I don't like it." "Well, you could always go back to working for me. The work would be boring, but actually," Droid 17, "I rather enjoyed exploring new worlds out there, but I think I'd like to explore this one for a while instead, if you don't mind." "Well, I don't own you. Nothing I could do matters in that regard," Bemmer said with a trace of bitterness and amusement. He never did want to be a slaver, but 17 had been valuable property. "I'd like to work for you when I'm done. Don't burn bridges and all that?" Bemmer nodded absently and looked at the reporters chasing Emma and utterly ignoring Hyman. "Oh, sure. No problem. Take your time, though. Something tells me our world is about to get a whole lot more interesting." So, I remember this story fondly. And without getting into too many spoilers, one of the two big bads in the new series I'm writing, Army of Fire, which is the first of the series, and The Fate of Inglemia or Inglemia, is the 9 Prime Worlds. This story only hints at the edges, but they were such an interesting villain that for a very long time I've been trying to find stories and concepts that it fit, and nothing quite worked until I needed a foil for the ridiculously overpowered military thaumaturgical republic of Inglemia. And the 9 Prime Worlds are 9 worlds that are technologically more advanced than Star Trek and not quite as advanced as the culture, that are basically a utopia. Despite some hidden dictatorial elements, for the average citizen of one of these 9 planets, life is completely perfect in every conceivable way. There's no poverty, there's no disease, people live for a long time, but the thing is that they do so at the expense of literally millions of alternate timelines that the people of those worlds don't consider to be real. And I don't know where I originally got the idea, but it's in some ways similar to the Eloi of the Time Machine, except in this case, they are their own Morlocks. And these companies that exploit all of these worlds do so on the false belief that has been set up to bring these 9 worlds together to basically say everybody else is not real. And we do that in our own world all the time. We brand somebody as the other because of race or religion or culture. So why not use quantum mechanics, or in one particular case, which is actually a big spoiler, the potential conflict between Inglemia and the 9 Prime. Needless to say, I probably will change a few things that came up in this story, but I'll probably eventually consider it canon. And, the 9 Prime Worlds are really messed up, and I've done a lot more work on them, and there's a lot more work that still needs to be done, even though I'm currently about 3/4 of the way done with Army of Fire. Broadly speaking, I would rate this story an A-. I don't think it's strong enough to make it through the slush pile, but I think that it would make it past the first round or two of a slush pile. It has interesting characters, it has a plot that you can understand, and it's different. And all of those things are something that if you're trying to go through gatekeepers instead of self-publishing, you will need. I've worked in a slush pile, and by the way, I cannot recommend enough, just to help your own writing, volunteer for a sci-fi magazine in their slush pile, because the years I spent in the leading edge when I was at BYU, reading all the mistakes that other people made in their fiction gave me a huge edge when I was writing this. You'll notice that most of the stories, except the one I didn't even bother reading, I tend to give either a C+ or a B to, right? I'll be honest, I don't think I have the gift of writing that some people do, but I keep doing it anyway, which is why I'm calling this Swamp Castle. But writing is something that if you keep working at it, you get better and better at. And learning the mistakes that other people made in their writing drastically helped me as a writer. And even if you are a gifted writer and everybody in your circle tells you that you should write and you know you have a gift for it, that does not change experience. I cannot recommend enough reading On Writing by Stephen King. And one of the things that he goes into is how much he wrote when he was like 12 or 13, so that by the time he actually sold his first story, he had written hundreds of thousands of words, like just a ton. There is no substitute for being a writer than writing, right? You cannot be a writer if you don't write. I don't care what your natural aptitude is. I don't even care how good your skill is, right? If I stop writing, I stop being a writer. I could call myself an author because I've self-published my own works, and I have 2 at this point, and I've written 7, and if I got hit by a meteorite at this point, I would have met my life goals. I'm happy. I'm still doing it anyway because I like to do it, even though I do admit the writing process itself can be extremely painful sometimes. But I keep at it, especially with Army of Fire, and so we'll see what's going on there. But the point is that this story almost works. There's a couple of problems. The first problem is I've learned some lessons since I originally wrote it. One of them is names matter, and except for 17, I can't, and I guess Emma and Hyman, because it's close to Simon, I can't remember any of these people's names. Now, to a certain degree, if you're writing about alternate timelines, you do need to have a sense of the familiar and a sense of the alien. But most of these stories in this series are just really fucking hard to pronounce, bizarre names when they don't need to be. And, if I'm writing about a culture a million years from now, they're going to have weird names. If I'm writing about a culture that's any variant of the 20th century or 21st century, especially Western Europeans, they're going to have recognizable names. And if they come from a culture that is not one I'm familiar with, there's this thing called research. In this case, all of these people had names from timelines that don't exist. 1 or 2 weirdness would make sense. The main character being so unfamiliar, anyway, there are problems with the names. The other problem is both the names of the factions and how complicated they are. And given that it's pretty much a crux of the story that these 2 arcane political factions have their differences, I could have done a better job of highlighting the differences between the 2. Now, to a certain degree, that was a deliberate point on my part, which is that alien societies are going to have alien politics, right? And while sometimes things boil down to rich versus poor, when your entire society and their prosperity exists based on making other people the other, that's going to be a little bit weird and different, right? And I think that if you're doing proper world building, that should reflect. The challenge in doing that is you still have to make it relatable to something people understand. And that's what kept this story from being an A to me. Some of the best stories I have in this series, which I will probably either reread or simply add commentary to, such as Mr. Hamburger or Waiting for the Monsters to Die, which are the 2 stories that I would give an A or maybe even an A+ in the case of Waiting for the Monsters to Die, is that they have alien concepts that are distilled to a very understandable format. And the stories that you remember, especially the short stories, need that ability to draw in and connect your audience.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!